The airport terminal was a cathedral of indifference. Julian Vance stood amidst the swirling chaos of hurried travelers, a solitary island of stillness in a river of frantic motion. The air, thick with the scent of jet fuel and stale coffee, hummed with 1,000 conversations he could not hear, a symphony of departures and arrivals that held no meaning for him. He was not going anywhere, and no one was waiting. His suit, a tailored armor of charcoal gray, felt stiff and foreign against his skin. It was the uniform of a man who commanded boardrooms and brokered multi-million-dollar deals, a man for whom time was a currency to be spent with ruthless efficiency. Yet, here, in the echoing expanse of Terminal C, he was just another shadow, lost in the anonymous glare of the fluorescent lights. His gaze was fixed on the massive departures board, watching the city names flicker and change. London, Tokyo, Paris. They were just words. Destinations on a map he had crossed 100 times without ever truly seeing. Each trip had been a sterile exercise in logistics, a blur of first-class cabins, black cars, and five-star hotels that all felt exactly the same. They were all just different shades of empty. In his hand, hidden from view, his fingers traced the smooth, worn contours of a small wooden airplane. It was a simple toy, carved from a single piece of maple, its tiny propeller frozen in time. It was the last thing he had, the only thing that mattered, a relic from a life that felt like it had belonged to someone else a lifetime ago. He came here every year on this exact date. He would buy a ticket for a flight he never intended to take, just to sit among the ghosts. It was a pilgrimage to the site of his own personal wreckage, a quiet, desperate ritual of remembrance. He would watch families embrace, lovers kiss goodbye, and children press their faces against the glass, their eyes wide with the promise of adventure. He watched it all with a hollow ache that had long since become his constant companion. A short distance away, near a pillar wrapped in festive holiday tinsel that seemed to mock the terminal's sterile environment, a different kind of quiet existed. It was a warmth that radiated from a woman with tired, gentle eyes and a little girl with hair the color of spun gold. The woman, Elara, was kneeling, carefully retying the lace on the little girl's worn pink sneaker. Elara's world had shrunk to the size of this child. Her days were a patchwork of small, necessary tasks, packing lunches, reading bedtime stories, and finding ways to stretch a meager budget until the end of the month. The airport was a necessary evil, a gateway to a new, uncertain chapter in a town where she hoped a promised job would be waiting. Hope was a fragile thing, but it was all she had. Lily, the little girl, was clutching a well-loved teddy bear, dressed in a tiny hand-knitted pilot's cap. She was not looking at the airplanes or the bustling crowds. Her attention was entirely focused on the tall, sad man standing alone by the departures board. He looked like the stone statues in the park her grandma used to take her to, the ones that always seemed to be looking for something they had lost. Julian's focus was broken by a faint, high-pitched hum. He realized it was the sound of a child humming a simple, meandering tune. He let his gaze drift from the cold, digital letters of the board and saw her. She was small, a splash of soft pink and gold against the terminal's grey palette. For a moment, their eyes met across the polished floor. Hers were a startling, clear blue, wide and full of a curiosity that felt almost invasive. He looked away immediately. Children were a part of the world he had locked away, a door he had bolted and sealed shut. They were reminders of tiny hands, of unrestrained laughter, of a future that had been stolen from him in a fiery final instant. He tightened his grip on the wooden plane, the smooth wood a familiar, painful comfort. Elara finished with the shoelace and straightened up, a weary sigh escaping her lips. "All right, sweet pea. Let's find our gate. We need to stay close." She took Lily's hand, but the little girl did not move. Her gaze was still fixed on the solitary man. "Mommy," Lily began, her voice soft but clear. Elara's heart gave a familiar, bittersweet pang. She had tried to explain, in the simple, gentle terms a 5-year-old could understand, that she was Aunt Elara. But Lily, in her own quiet way, had made her choice. She had needed a mommy, and Elara was there. It was a title she wore with both honor and a deep, aching sadness for the woman who should have been wearing it. "What is it, Lily?" Elara asked, her voice a soft murmur. "That man is lost," Lily stated, with the simple certainty of childhood. Elara glanced over at the man. He was impeccably dressed, his posture rigid, his face a mask of controlled indifference. He did not look lost. He looked powerful, intimidating, and utterly unapproachable. "He's not lost, honey. He's just waiting for his flight like us." But Lily shook her head, her golden curls bouncing. She slipped her small hand from Elara's grasp. It happened so fast. One moment she was there, a warm, solid presence, and the next she was a flash of pink, toddling across the glossy floor with a determined, unwavering purpose. "Lily, no," Elara whispered, a spike of panic in her chest. She started forward, her apology already forming on her lips. Julian saw the small figure approaching, but his mind refused to process it. He remained perfectly still, a statue, as she came to a stop just a few feet in front of him. She tilted her head, her blue eyes examining him with an unnerving directness. He could smell the faint sweet scent of strawberries from her shampoo. She held up her bear. "This is Captain Teddington," she announced. "He's my co-pilot." Julian said nothing. He could not find his voice. His throat felt as if it were filled with dust. He just stared at the child, a ghost from a life he was no longer allowed to live. Lily seemed undeterred by his silence. She looked from his face down to the departures board, then back up at him. Her expression was serious, as if she were contemplating a great and complex problem. "Grandma said, my parents are in heaven," she said, her voice small but carrying in the cavernous space, "so I'm flying up there to meet them." The words struck Julian with the force of a physical blow. They bypassed every wall, every defense he had spent years constructing. They went straight to the hollowed-out core of him, the place where his own grief was interred. For a dizzying moment, the airport dissolved around him. The noise faded to a distant roar, and all he could see were those innocent, trusting blue eyes. He saw a different pair of eyes, brown and full of mischief, looking up at him. He heard a different voice, a boy's voice, asking, "Is heaven higher than the clouds, Daddy?" Elara finally reached them, her face flushed with embarrassment. "I am so sorry," she said, her voice breathless as she gently took Lily's shoulder. She gets away from me sometimes. Lily, you must not bother people." Lily looked up at Elara, then back at Julian. She did not seem to understand the reprimand. "He looks like he's going to heaven too," she explained patiently. "He's just as sad as me." The second blow was even more profound than the first. Julian felt the armor crack. A fissure ran through the ice that had encased his heart for 5 long years. He looked down at the child, and for the first time he did not see a painful reminder of what he had lost. He saw only her. He saw a tiny girl carrying a burden far too heavy for her small shoulders, navigating a world of loss with a simple, heartbreaking map drawn from a grandmother's gentle words. He finally found his voice, though it came out as a rough, unused sound. "It's all right," he said, the words feeling clumsy in his mouth. He directed them at Elara, but his eyes were still on Lily. "She's not bothering me." Just then, a disembodied voice echoed through the terminal, announcing a widespread delay for all outbound flights due to a sudden storm system. A collective groan rippled through the crowd. Elara's shoulders slumped, the weight of this new complication settling heavily upon her. Another expense, another hurdle. Julian saw the flicker of despair in her eyes. He saw the frayed cuff of her coat, the weariness etched in the fine lines around her mouth. He saw the fierce, protective love with which she held the little girl's hand, and in that moment, an impulse he had not felt in years rose within him. It was a quiet, unfamiliar urge to help, to fix something. He cleared his throat. "The airline lounge," he said, the words still feeling awkward. "It will be quieter there, more comfortable. Please, allow me to be your guest." Elara stared at him, taken aback. She saw the wealth in the cut of his suit, the expensive watch on his wrist. People like him did not speak to people like her, except to give an order. "Oh no, we couldn't possibly. That's very kind, but—" "Please," he repeated, and this time there was a different tone in his voice. It was not a command, it was a plea, a flicker of profound loneliness in his dark eyes that she recognized, because she had seen it in her own reflection many times. The hot chocolate is much better there. For your co-pilot." He nodded toward Lily. Lily's eyes widened. "Hot chocolate," she whispered, as if he had offered her the crown jewels. Elara looked from the hopeful face of her niece to the strangely vulnerable face of this stranger. Something told her to say no, to retreat back into the safety of their anonymity. But another, softer voice urged her to accept this small, unexpected kindness. "Okay," she heard herself say. "Thank you." The first-class lounge was a world away from the chaotic terminal. Here, silence was a plush carpet that absorbed all sound. The lighting was low and warm, the chairs were made of soft leather, and the air smelled faintly of cinnamon and brewed coffee. It was a sanctuary of calm, a place so foreign to Elara's current life that it felt like stepping onto a different planet. Julian led them to a quiet corner booth, away from the few other passengers who were murmuring into their phones or staring at their laptops. He felt strangely self-conscious, as if he were guiding ghosts through a place they did not belong. But then Lily scrambled onto the leather seat, her small feet dangling far above the floor, and her presence seemed to make the space real. A server appeared, silent and efficient. Julian ordered 2 hot chocolates and a black coffee without looking at the menu. He watched as Lily carefully sat Captain Teddington on the table beside her, positioning him so he could see the room. She was completely at ease, her small world of imagination a portable fortress against any strangeness. Elara, however, felt a knot of anxiety in her stomach. She smoothed her simple cotton dress, suddenly aware of how it contrasted with the luxurious surroundings. She felt like an imposter, waiting to be discovered and politely asked to leave. She clutched her worn handbag in her lap, a flimsy shield against the opulence. "Thank you again for this," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "You really didn't have to." Julian simply nodded, taking a sip of the coffee that had materialized before him. The silence stretched between them, not awkward, but heavy, with unspoken things. He looked at her, truly looked at her, for the first time. He saw the exhaustion that was more than just travel weariness. It was a deep, soul-level fatigue. Yet, beneath it, there was a strength, a quiet resilience that was as plain as the determined set of her jaw. The hot chocolates arrived in large, white mugs, each topped with a mountain of whipped cream and a dusting of cocoa. Lily let out a small gasp of delight. She picked up her spoon and with intense concentration began to eat the whipped cream, one tiny spoonful at a time. The simple, unadulterated joy on the child's face was a thing of pure beauty. It was a light in the hushed, dim room. Julian found himself watching her, a faint ghost of a smile touching his lips before he was even aware of it. It felt like a muscle he had not used in years, stiff and unfamiliar. "She's a wonderful girl," he said quietly. Elara's gaze softened as she watched her niece. "She is," she agreed. "She's been through a lot. She's stronger than any adult I know." The words were simple, but they carried the weight of a long, painful story. He wanted to ask, but he did not know how. The part of him that understood casual conversation, that could engage in small talk, had atrophied from disuse. He only knew how to be a chief executive officer or how to be a grieving man. There was no longer anything in between. As if sensing his question, Elara spoke again, her eyes still on Lily. "Her parents, my sister and her husband. There was a car accident about a year ago." She said it Flatly, the facts laid bare without any emotional varnish. The varnish had been worn away by a year of legal papers, of selling a house full of memories, of learning how to be a parent overnight. "I'm sorry," Julian said. The words were inadequate, flimsy things, but they were all he had. She gave a small, sad smile. "She talks about heaven a lot. Her grandmother, my mother, tried to explain it in a way that wouldn't frighten her. I think maybe she did too good a job." Her smile faded. "Now, Lily thinks it's a real place you can buy a ticket to, like Disneyland." Julian looked at the little girl, now with a ring of chocolate around her mouth, completely absorbed in her sweet treat. He understood, with a sudden, painful clarity, the desperate logic of a child's heart. If heaven was a place and her parents were there, then she must find a way to go to them. It was so simple, so pure, and so utterly heartbreaking. "And you?" he asked, the question surprising even himself. Where are you flying to?" "A town called Northwood," Elara replied, wrapping her cold hands around her own untouched mug. "I have a job offer there. A librarian's assistant. It's not much, but it's a new start for both of us." Her voice was filled with a determined sort of hope, the kind of hope you have to manufacture when the real thing is in short supply. He saw it all then. The escape, the desperate bid for a fresh beginning, away from the ghosts and the pitying looks of friends and neighbours. He knew that journey well, though his own had been an internal one, a retreat into a fortress of wealth and silence. They sat for a long time, the only sounds the quiet clink of Lily's spoon against her mug and the distant, muffled announcements from the terminal. Julian found the silence comforting. It was a shared silence, not an empty one. For the first time in 5 years, he was not just a man alone in a room. He was a man sitting in silence with 2 other people. The distinction felt monumental. He learned her name was Elara. She learned his was Julian. They were just names, labels exchanged in the hushed quiet of the lounge, but it felt like a significant transaction. It made them real to each other. The announcement came an hour later. The storm was worsening. All flights were officially cancelled until morning. Elara's face fell. The carefully constructed hope she had been nursing seemed to crumble. A hotel room was an expense she could not afford. The thought of spending the night on the hard, cold chairs of the terminal with a 5-year-old made her heart sink. Julian saw the panic flash in her eyes before she could hide it. "I have a suite," he said, the words coming out before he had fully formed the thought. "At the airport hotel. It has 2 bedrooms. There is more than enough space." Elara's head snapped up. "Absolutely not. We couldn't impose. You've already been far too generous." Her refusal was immediate, reflexive. It was the pride of someone who was used to managing on her own, who was wary of charity. "It is not an imposition," Julian insisted, his tone leaving no room for argument. "It is a practical solution to a logistical problem." He was back on familiar ground now, dealing with logistics. It was easier than dealing with the complex, messy emotions that had been stirring within him. "The room is empty. It is paid for. It makes no sense for you and your niece to be uncomfortable when a comfortable alternative exists." He looked at Lily, who was beginning to droop, her head resting on Captain Teddington. Her day had been too long, her small body running on the last of its reserves. "Please," he said again, his voice softer this time, "let me do this. For her." Looking at Lily's sleepy face, Elara felt her pride warring with her practicality. Her daughter, her niece, needed a warm bed. That was the only thing that mattered. The man's logic was cold and impersonal, but his eyes held something else, something kind. She finally gave a small, defeated nod. "All right. Thank you, Julian." The hotel suite was larger than Elara's entire apartment. It was a space of quiet, understated luxury, with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out onto the rain-lashed runway. The air was clean and still. Lily, who had been half asleep, revived instantly, her eyes wide with wonder. She ran to the window, pressing her hands against the cool glass to watch the distant, blinking lights of the grounded airplanes. "It's like a castle in the sky," she breathed. Julian watched her, a strange feeling twisting in his chest. It was a dull ache, but it was different from the sharp, familiar pain of grief. This was something else. It was the feeling of a long, dormant part of his, soul stirring, creaking back to life. He had not had a child's voice echo in a room he occupied for 5 years. The sound was both devastating and beautiful. He showed Elara to the second bedroom. It was pristine, the bed turned down with crisp white linens. "I'll order some dinner," he said, retreating to the safety of making arrangements. "Is there anything Lily likes?" "Macaroni and cheese is always a safe bet," Elara said, with a grateful smile. She felt the tension begin to seep out of her shoulders. For one night, she did not have to worry. For one night, they were safe and warm. They ate in the suite's small living area. It was not a formal dinner, but a quiet meal served on the coffee table. Lily happily devoured her macaroni and cheese, chattering away to Captain Teddington about their sky castle. Elara and Julian ate their own meals, mostly in silence, but it was a comfortable quiet now, filled with the gentle sounds of the child's monologue and the drumming of the rain against the window. After Lily was tucked into the large, soft bed, fast asleep, with her bear nestled under her arm, Elara returned to the living area. Julian was standing by the window, holding the small wooden airplane in his hand. He was staring out at the storm, his reflection a faint ghostly image against the dark, wet glass. "She fell asleep before her head even hit the pillow," Elara said softly, not wanting to startle him. He turned, the little plane still cradled in his palm. He seemed to notice for the first time that he was holding it. A flicker of something, pain, embarrassment, crossed his face, and he made a move to put it in his pocket. "That's a beautiful little plane," Elara said quickly, wanting to stop him, wanting to understand the sadness she saw in his eyes. He paused, his hand hovering over his pocket. He looked down at the toy, as if seeing it for the first time. "It was my son's," he said, his voice low and strained. The words hung in the air between them, heavy and fragile. Elara's breath caught in her throat. "Your son?" He finally looked at her, and the mask was gone. His eyes were raw, filled with a grief so profound it seemed to suck the air from the room. "His name was Leo," he said. "He was 6. Julian began to speak, and it was as if a dam had broken. The story poured out of him, a torrent of words held back for 5 long years. He spoke of his wife, Clara, of her laugh that could fill a whole house. He spoke of his son, a bright, curious boy who loved airplanes more than anything in the world. A boy who wanted to be a pilot when he grew up. "We were supposed to go to his grandparents' house," Julian recounted, his voice hollow. "A short flight. I was meant to be on the plane with them. But a meeting came up, a merger, something I thought was important." He gave a short, bitter laugh that held no humor. "I told them I would take the next flight. I told my son I'd see him in a few hours." He turned back to the window, unable to meet her gaze. "The plane went down in a storm, just like this one. There were no survivors." The story settled in the quiet room, a devastating weight. Elara felt tears spring to her eyes, not of pity, but of a deep, shared understanding of loss. She knew what it was to have your world ripped apart in an instant, to be left behind with nothing but ghosts and memories. She did not offer empty platitudes. She did not say, "I'm sorry for your loss," or "they're in a better place." She simply stood there, a silent witness to his pain, letting her presence be her comfort. After a long moment, she spoke, her voice thick with emotion. "You're not alone in your sadness, Julian." He finally turned to face her. He saw the genuine empathy in her tear-filled eyes. He saw that she was not looking at a wealthy CEO. She was looking at a man whose heart had been shattered. For the first time, he felt seen, truly seen. The next morning, the storm had passed, leaving behind a world washed clean and glistening under a pale sun. The airline had rebooked Elara and Lily on an afternoon flight. Julian insisted on taking them to breakfast in the hotel restaurant. Something had shifted between them. The careful distance was gone, replaced by a fragile, tentative connection. They spoke of small things: Lily's love for dinosaurs, Elara's passion for classic literature, Julian's surprising fondness for old black and white films. It was a delicate, careful exploration, like two shipwreck survivors learning to trust solid ground again. Lily seemed to have adopted Julian completely. She chatted to him throughout breakfast, showing him how she could fold her napkin into a boat and asking him if he thought Captain Teddington would need his own seat on the new plane. Julian found himself responding, engaging with her simple, joyful view of the world. He felt a warmth spreading through his chest, a feeling he had long ago forgotten. As they were leaving the restaurant, a man in a sharp suit approached them. "Julian, I thought that was you. I tried your cell all day yesterday." The man's name was Marcus Thorne, a business rival with a smile as slick as his hair. Marcus's eyes flickered from Julian to Elara, taking in her simple clothes and the child holding Julian's hand. A smirk played on his lips. "Found yourself some interesting new travel companions," he said, his tone dripping with insinuation. "Branching out into charity work, Vance." The words, cold and condescending, shattered the warm bubble that had formed around the three of them. Julian felt an instant, familiar chill. The walls he had let down slammed back into place, higher and thicker than before. He saw Elara flinch, saw the hurt and embarrassment in her eyes. He saw himself through Marcus's cynical gaze, a powerful man with a woman who clearly did not belong in his world. All his deepest fears came rushing back. The fear of attachment, the fear of loss. The world was a cruel, judgmental place. Getting close to people only led to pain. He had learned that lesson in the most brutal way possible. What was he doing? Letting these two strangers into his carefully controlled life, he was inviting disaster. He was setting himself up for another fall. "Marcus," Julian said, his voice flat and devoid of all warmth, "I'm in the middle of something." He turned his back on the other man, a clear dismissal, but the damage was done. The poison had seeped in. He was quiet on the way back to the airport. The easy connection from breakfast was gone, replaced by a tense, heavy silence. Elara could feel the change in him. The warmth was gone, replaced by the same cold, unreadable mask he had worn when she first saw him. She did not understand what had happened. She felt a sharp pang of hurt, a fool for thinking for even a moment that this could be anything more than a fleeting act of kindness. When they reached the security checkpoint, Julian stopped. He did not meet her eyes. He looked over her head at some distant point down the terminal. "This is where I'll leave you," he said, his voice formal and detached. "Julian, thank you for everything," Elara began, her voice trembling slightly. "For the lounge, the hotel." "It was nothing," he cut her off. "Just a solution to a logistical problem." He used the same words as before, but now they sounded cold and dismissive, stripping the kindness from the act and leaving only a sterile transaction. Lily, sensing the sudden frost in the air, looked up at him, her blue eyes wide with confusion. "Aren't you coming with us?" she asked. Julian finally looked down, but his gaze was guarded. "No, I have business to attend to. It was a pleasure to meet you." He said the words like a line from a script. He turned to leave, a man retreating back into his fortress. "Wait," Elara said, the single word stopping him. He turned back, his expression impatient. I thought—" She trailed off, unsure what she had thought, that a single night could erase years of pain, that a brief connection could mean something. She felt foolish. "Never mind. Goodbye, Julian." He gave a curt nod and walked away without another word, disappearing into the crowd. Elara watched him go, a hollow ache in her chest. She took Lily's hand, blinking back tears. "Come on, sweet pea. Let's go find our plane." Julian walked blindly through the terminal, the noise and the crowds pressing in on him. He felt a grim, bitter satisfaction. He had done the right thing. He had cut it off, before it could grow into something that could hurt him. He had protected himself. He was safe again in his isolation. But as he returned to the sterile silence of his hotel suite, the feeling was not one of safety. It was one of profound, suffocating loneliness. The room, which had briefly been filled with the light of a child's laughter, was now just an empty, opulent box. He stood by the window, staring out at the sky. He had won. He had kept his grief pure, untouched by the messy complications of new emotions. He had kept his heart locked away, safe from further damage. He was alone, just as he had been for 5 years, so why did it feel like he had just lost something precious all over again? He sank onto the sofa, the silence of the suite deafening. His hand went to his pocket, searching for the familiar comfort of the wooden plane, but his fingers brushed against a piece of paper instead. He pulled it out. It was a child's drawing, folded into a small square. He unfolded it carefully. On the page, rendered in bright, wobbly crayon, were 3 figures: a tall man in a grey suit, a woman with brown hair, and a little girl in a pink dress. They were all holding hands. Above them was a giant, smiling sun, and next to it, a lopsided airplane with Captain Teddington waving from the cockpit window. The plane was not flying away. It was flying towards the sun, towards heaven. A sound escaped Julian's throat, a choked, ragged sob. He stared at the simple drawing, at the innocent, hopeful world it depicted. A world where 3 broken people could hold hands and stand together under a smiling sun. Lily had not drawn a departure. She had drawn a family, a new family, flying towards heaven together. The truth hit him with the force of a physical impact. He was not protecting himself from pain. He was running from the possibility of happiness. He was letting the ghosts of his past dictate the terms of his future. He had been so afraid of losing everything again that he was deliberately choosing to have nothing. Marcus Thorne and his cynical world didn't matter. The only thing that mattered was the warmth he had felt sitting at that breakfast table, the light in Lily's eyes, the quiet strength in Elara's. He looked at the clock on the wall. Her flight was in 45 minutes. He moved faster than he had in years. He grabbed his coat, shoving the drawing carefully into his pocket, and ran from the room. He did not wait for the elevator, taking the stairs 2 at a time, his heart pounding in his chest with a feeling that was not fear, but a desperate, soaring hope. He sprinted through the airport, ignoring the strange looks from other travelers. He was a man with a purpose, his eyes scanning the gate numbers. He found their gate just as the final boarding call was being announced. Elara was standing in line, holding Lily's hand. Her face was pale, her shoulders slumped in resignation. She was looking straight ahead, her gaze empty. Lily was quiet, her head bowed, clutching Captain Teddington tightly. "Elara!" His voice cut through the noise of the terminal. She turned, her eyes widening in disbelief. He pushed his way through the line of passengers, his only focus the woman and the child. He stopped in front of her, breathing heavily, his carefully composed exterior completely gone. "Don't go," he said, the words raw and urgent. She stared at him, her expression a mixture of confusion and a hope she was afraid to feel. "Julian, what are you doing?" "I was wrong," he said, his voice shaking with the force of his emotion. "I was a fool. I was running. I've been running for 5 years, from everything, from everyone." He took a deep breath. "What that man said, it doesn't matter. None of it matters. The only thing that matters is that for the first time since I lost my family, I didn't feel alone when I was with you." Tears welled in Elara's eyes. I don't understand. "I don't want to be alone anymore," he said, his voice dropping to a desperate whisper. He looked down at Lily, who was watching him with wide, solemn eyes. "And I don't want you to be alone either." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the drawing. He held it out for Elara to see. "She thinks we're a family," he said softly. And I think she might be right. He looked directly into Elara's eyes, laying his heart bare. Stay, he pleaded. Don't get on that plane. Stay here, with me. Let's see what kind of family we can be, the three of us. The final boarding announcement echoed behind them, a siren call to a life of quiet survival she had been resigned to. But in front of her was a man with a broken heart, offering her his shattered pieces and asking if they could try to put them together with hers. It was terrifying. It was reckless. It was the most hopeful thing that had ever happened to her. Lily, who had been watching them, let go of Elara's hand. She stepped forward and wrapped her small arms around Julian's leg. She looked up at him, her face full of a simple, unwavering trust. "We can fly to heaven another day," she said. Tears were streaming down Elara's face now, but she was smiling, a real, brilliant smile that lit up her entire face. She stepped out of the line, leaving the path to the airplane behind. She reached out and placed her hand on Julian's arm. "Okay," she whispered. "Okay, Julian. We'll stay." 1 year later, the world was not grey and sterile. It was a kaleidoscope of autumn colour. The air in the park was crisp and smelled of damp earth and wood smoke. Julian was no longer wearing a suit. He was in a soft, comfortable sweater, his sleeves pushed up to his elbows. He was laughing. It was a deep, genuine sound that came from his soul. He was pushing Lily on a swing, sending her higher and higher into the bright blue sky. She squealed with delight, her golden hair flying out behind her like a banner. "Higher, Julian, higher!" Elara sat on a nearby bench, a book resting unread in her lap. She watched them, a feeling of such profound peace and happiness settling over her that it felt like a warm blanket. Their life was not a grand, dramatic romance. It was a quiet collection of small, beautiful moments. It was making breakfast together in the morning. It was Julian reading Lily bedtime stories with different voices for all the characters. It was falling asleep at night, with his arms securely around her. He had sold his stark, minimalist penthouse, and they had bought a house with a garden, a home. He still worked, but he no longer let it consume him. His real life began the moment he walked through the front door each evening. He caught Lily at the apex of her swing, lifting her down into his arms. She giggled, throwing her arms around his neck. He carried her over to the bench and sat beside Elara, keeping Lily nestled on his lap. He leaned over and kissed Elara, a soft, simple kiss that tasted of autumn air and contentment. "I love you," he murmured against her lips. "I love you too," she whispered back. Lily snuggled between them, content and secure. She pointed up at a small airplane, leaving a white trail across the endless blue sky. "Look," she said, "a plane." Julian and Elara both looked up. For a moment, a shadow of the past might have flickered, but it was only a shadow. The sun was too bright. Julian held Elara's hand, his other arm securely around the little girl who had saved him. They were not at an airport, waiting for a departure. They were here, together. They were not lost. They were home.